The Fall of Adam and Eve, Part 1, The Garden of Delight, Dawn of Innocence. In the beginning, before sorrow touched the earth, the Garden of Eden lay at the heart of creation like a breath of heaven made visible. Rivers wound through its meadows, feeding trees heavy with fruit, and the air shimmered with the scent of life unspoiled. Light fell through the branches in gold and silver, and every living thing moved in perfect peace. Lions drank beside lambs, birds sang in endless harmony, and the ground itself rejoiced beneath the steps of the first man. God had shaped Adam from the dust of the earth, breathed into him the breath of life, and placed him in this garden to tend it and to walk with the Creator in the cool of the day. Adam knew no fear, no shame, no division between heart and spirit. His work was joy, his rest was worship. The world was whole, and God called it good. But even in perfection, the Lord saw something missing. For though Adam spoke with the birds and named the beasts, no creature was found that could walk beside him in soul and mind. So the Lord caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep. From his side, he took a rib and formed it into flesh, shaping it with tender care. When Adam awoke, the sunlight fell upon her, Eve, the mother of all who would live. She stood before him radiant and alive, her eyes filled with wonder at the world and at the one who beheld her. "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," Adam said, joy trembling in his voice. And the Lord blessed them both, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." The days that followed were filled with laughter and discovery. Adam and Eve walked hand in hand through the garden, naming flowers that had never been named, tasting fruits that glowed like jewels beneath the light. Rivers sparkled as they bathed in their cool waters, birds circled above them like living songs. In the evenings, they rested beneath the trees and spoke softly of the mysteries around them. When the voice of God came walking in the garden, they ran to meet him with delight. He spoke to them not as a distant king, but as a father to his children. His presence was their light, his word their life. Yet in the midst of the garden stood two trees unlike the rest. One was the tree of life, whose fruit glowed with eternal light, the other, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, whose beauty shimmered like a mirror of mystery. God said to them, "You may freely eat from every tree of the garden, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it, you shall surely die." Adam and Eve listened and obeyed, their hearts pure, untainted by doubt. They did not yet know deceit, for truth was all they had ever seen. The command was simple, yet it carried within it the test of love, not a prison, but a choice. For love that cannot choose is not love at all. And so, within the perfect world, freedom waited beside obedience. Time passed, and peace filled every corner of the garden. The beasts of the field grew tame at their call, and the trees bent to their touch. But far beyond the gates of Eden, in the shadows where light did not reach, another being watched. Once he had walked among the hosts of heaven, radiant and wise, but pride had consumed him, and he fell like lightning from the sky. His name was Lucifer, now called Satan, the adversary. His heart burned with jealousy at the creatures God had made in his image, for in their innocence he saw what he had lost forever. If he could not destroy the Creator, he would wound him through his creation. And so he waited, watching the garden where light and laughter dwelt, searching for the perfect moment to whisper the first lie. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air shimmered with the scent of ripened fruit, Eve wandered near the heart of the garden. The light caught the fruit of the forbidden tree, and for the first time she paused to look closely. It was beautiful beyond all others, smooth, shining, glistening with promise. The serpent, coiled among its branches, watched her approach. He was not like the serpents of today, but a creature of cunning grace, his scales like bronze in the fading light, his eyes full of strange wisdom. When he spoke, his voice was soft and curious, almost kind. "Has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree in the garden?" Eve turned, startled, but not afraid. "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden," she answered. "But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor touch it, lest you die." The serpent tilted his head, his voice a whisper that wound through her thoughts. "You shall not surely die," he said. "For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." His words were like honey and smoke, sweet and dark. Eve looked again at the fruit. It gleamed with the reflection of her own face, beautiful and alive. The thought that she might be more, wiser, greater, began to take root. For the first time, doubt entered the human heart. She reached toward the fruit, her hand trembling between obedience and desire. The serpent's eyes gleamed. The moment hung suspended in the air like the pause before a storm. And then, she took it. The skin broke beneath her fingers, the scent filled the air, and she ate. The taste was sweet, yet bitter beneath the tongue, and a shadow passed across her face. She turned and gave it to Adam, who stood beside her. He looked at her, the one he loved, and though his heart warned him, he too ate. And in that instant, the world changed. The light dimmed, the wind fell still, and the earth itself seemed to groan. The glory that had clothed them vanished, and they saw their nakedness. Shame entered their hearts, and fear followed after. They sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves, trembling at what they had done. The serpent slipped away, smiling in the dark, for the wound had been struck. Evening passed, and morning came, the dawn of exile, when innocence turned to knowledge, and the sound of God's footsteps would soon bring both judgment and mercy. The voice in the garden, judgment and mercy. The fruit lay half-eaten upon the grass, its juices darkening the soil, and the air that once shimmered with peace now trembled with silence. The sun dimmed behind the trees, and the wind, which had always sung with joy, grew still as though holding its breath. Adam and Eve stood beneath the branches, their hearts pounding, their hands clutching at the fig leaves they had sewn together in haste. The innocence that had once clothed them in light was gone, replaced by a weight they had never known, the heaviness of guilt. They looked upon one another, and for the first time, they felt shame. The garden, once their home, now seemed vast and strange. Even the birds were quiet. In the distance, thunder rumbled faintly, though the sky was clear. It was not the sound of storm, but of something deeper, the trembling of creation itself. When evening came, a soft light spread through the trees, and the familiar sound of footsteps echoed through the garden. The voice of the Lord moved like a melody in the air, calling, "Adam, where are you?" The sound that had once brought joy now struck fear into their hearts. They ran from the path, hiding among the thick leaves and shadows, their breaths shallow, their souls quaking. The Creator called again, his voice both gentle and filled with sorrow, "Where are you?" Adam stepped forward slowly, trembling, his eyes downcast. "I heard your voice in the garden," he said, "and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself." The words fell heavy between heaven and earth, the first confession of fear. God looked upon him and asked, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" Adam hesitated, the truth burning in his chest. "The woman whom you gave to be with me," he said, "she gave me of the tree, and I ate." His voice was small, filled with shame and blame intertwined. Then the Lord turned to Eve, and his voice, though calm, carried the weight of truth. "What is this that you have done?" Eve lifted her eyes, tears glistening. "The serpent deceived me," she said, "and I ate." The garden seemed to darken as silence fell. The Lord looked upon them both, his creation now wounded by their own will. Yet even in his grief, his gaze was not wrathful but sorrowful, like that of a father watching his children break their own hearts. Then the Lord spoke to the serpent who had hidden in the shadows. His voice was thunder and fire. "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." The serpent hissed and coiled upon itself, its glory stripped away, condemned to crawl in humiliation. Yet hidden within the curse was the first promise, a prophecy of redemption. Though man had fallen, the seed of the woman would one day crush the deceiver. Even in judgment, mercy was already stirring. Then the Lord turned to Eve. "I will greatly multiply your sorrow in your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Her heart trembled as the words sank in. The joy of life would now be mingled with pain, the gift of love shadowed by longing. Yet within her would also rest the promise of hope, for from her womb would come the line of redemption. And to Adam the Lord said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, 'You shall not eat of it,' cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." The words broke the silence like a tolling bell. Adam lowered his head, tears falling upon the earth from which he had been made. The soil that once yielded fruit freely would now resist his hands. Life itself would be struggle, and death would follow all. The cost of one act had changed the world. The Lord looked upon them both, standing trembling among the trees. Their fig leaves were withering, their shame still uncovered. Then, in a gesture of deep compassion, he took the skins of animals, the first sacrifice, and made garments for them. The blood that stained the ground became the silent symbol of mercy, the foreshadowing of a greater covering yet to come. For even in judgment, God himself provided what they could not. The air grew cool again, and the Lord spoke once more, his tone heavy with sorrow yet full of resolve. "Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and live forever," his words trailed into silence. Then came the sound of the wind rising, and the light around them grew brighter than day. Angels appeared at the edge of the garden, radiant beings with faces like flame, their eyes both fierce and grieving. The Lord said to them, "Guard the way to the tree of life." And at the eastern gate of Eden, he placed a cherubim with a sword of fire, turning every way to keep the path closed. Adam and Eve stood upon the threshold of the garden, their faces wet with tears. Behind them, paradise glowed like dawn, forever out of reach. Ahead of them stretched the wilderness, untamed, unknown, yet not without hope. Eve clung to Adam's arm as they took their first steps into the dust. The ground was cold beneath their feet, but somewhere in their hearts burned the faint spark of a promise, that the God who had made them would not leave them alone. The wind carried the sound of the turning sword, its fire flickering against the horizon. And though Eden was lost, heaven's plan had only begun. The voice that had once walked beside them now echoed from afar, not in anger, but in longing. The story of redemption had started, written in tears and mercy. Evening passed, and morning came, the day humanity began its journey home. East of Eden, the first exile. The light of Eden faded behind them as Adam and Eve walked into the wilderness, the sound of the flaming sword echoing faintly in the distance. The air outside the garden was dry and heavy, the earth rough beneath their feet. They looked back once, seeing the gates glowing with holy fire, and then turned away, their hearts breaking with every step. The scent of paradise still clung to their clothes, but it was fading fast, replaced by the dust of the world they had chosen. The trees grew sparse, the flowers fewer, and the songs of the birds seemed far away. Adam carried a walking staff fashioned from a branch he had taken from the garden's edge, the last thing his hands had touched before the gates closed forever. Eve walked beside him in silence, her eyes full of tears she could no longer hold back. She clutched the garment of skin God had given her, feeling its weight, a reminder of mercy paid for with blood. The world was vast before them, yet it felt empty. Each sound was unfamiliar, the rustle of the wind through strange grasses, the cry of a creature unseen. When night fell, the darkness pressed close around them, and for the first time, they felt fear. They huddled together beneath the stars, no longer shining as they had above Eden, and Adam whispered prayers he barely understood, calling upon the God who had made them, the one who had sent them out. And though heaven was silent, he felt that God still watched, still loved, even from afar. Days turned into weeks as they learned to survive. The soil resisted their hands, thorns tore their skin as they worked to grow food. The ground that once yielded easily now demanded sweat and patience. When the first seed sprouted, Adam wept with gratitude. Eve gathered roots and herbs, learning which gave life and which brought pain. Together they built a shelter of stones and branches, the first home of humankind, rough but sacred. There, under the open sky, they began again. Their hearts ached with the memory of what was lost, yet the spark of faith kept them moving. At night they spoke softly of the garden, of the river that split into four, of the tree of life and the sound of God walking in the cool of the day. Eve often wept when she remembered the look in God's eyes before they left, not wrath, but sorrow. "He still loves us," Adam would say, though his voice trembled. "He would not have clothed us if he meant to forget us." And she would rest her head on his shoulder, finding comfort in his faith. Time passed, and the pain of loss gave way to the rhythm of survival. Then came the day when Eve felt life stirring within her. At first she did not understand the flutter in her body, but soon it grew stronger, and she knew. When the time came, she cried out in pain and wonder, the first mother in creation. And when she held the child in her arms, she wept again, not from sorrow but from awe. "I have gotten a man from the Lord," she said, naming him Cain. Adam looked upon his son and felt both joy and fear, for the child was born into a world of toil and shadow, yet he bore the image of God still. In time another son was born, Abel, gentle and quiet, his eyes bright with peace. The two boys grew, learning from their father's hands. Cain tilled the soil, his back strong and proud, while Abel tended the flocks, his heart calm as the morning fields. Together they built altars and brought offerings to the Lord, hoping to please the God their parents still prayed to through tears. One day, Cain brought an offering from the fruit of the ground, and Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the best of what he had. And the Lord looked with favor upon Abel's offering, but upon Cain's he did not look with favor. The reason was not in the gifts but in the hearts that gave them. Cain's heart had grown proud, hardened by labor and silent resentment. Abel's heart, soft and humble, offered not just a sacrifice but trust. When Cain saw that his brother was accepted and he was not, anger rose in him like fire. His face fell, and he turned away from the altar. Then the voice of the Lord spoke, gentle yet piercing, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Cain heard the words, but the fire in his heart did not cool. He called his brother to the field one morning, and Abel followed, unaware. The sun climbed high, the air still and heavy. They walked among the stones, and Cain spoke no word. Then suddenly, with a cry of rage, he struck his brother down. The ground drank the blood of the righteous, and the world shuddered once more. The voice of the Lord came to Cain as it once had to Adam, "Where's Abel your brother?" Cain answered, his voice trembling yet defiant, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done?" "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the earth which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. A fugitive and a wanderer you shall be on the earth." Cain fell to the ground, crying out, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground, I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord, in mercy even toward the guilty, said, "Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, that none should slay him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Adam and Eve heard what had happened, and their hearts broke again. The garden had been lost once more, not to a serpent but to their own blood. Yet even in grief, Eve bore another son, and she called his name Seth, saying, "For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." And through that seed the promise endured. Though they lived far from Eden, though the way to the tree was guarded by flame, hope still walked beside them. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when humanity learned the cost of sin, and yet mercy still followed east of Eden. The blood of the earth, the cry of Abel. The wind swept over the fields where the brothers had once walked side by side, and the earth still bore the mark of their footsteps. But now there was silence, heavy and mournful, for Abel no longer walked among the living. His blood had fallen into the soil, dark and sacred, crying out to heaven for justice. The place where it happened lay under the open sky, the grass stained and trampled, the air still echoing faintly with the sound of a cry that had pierced creation itself. Cain wandered nearby, his hands trembling, his heart pounding with a fear he could not name. The rage that had driven him was gone, leaving behind only emptiness and horror. He looked down at his hands and saw the stain that water could not wash away. He tried to speak, but no words came. The weight of what he had done pressed upon him like the stones of the earth. He turned his face from the sky, for he could not bear the gaze of God. But the voice came again, not from above but from within the silence itself, deep and sorrowful. "Where's Abel your brother?" The sound filled Cain's chest, and he knew he could not hide. "I do not know," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Then came the answer, heavy with truth and pain, "What have you done?" "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain fell to his knees as the earth seemed to tremble beneath him. The blood he had spilled had become a witness, an eternal testimony written not in ink but in life itself. "Now you are cursed from the ground," said the Lord, "which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a wanderer you shall be upon the earth." Cain lifted his face, streaked with dust and tears. "My punishment is greater than I can bear," he cried. "You have driven me out from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your presence. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord, even in judgment, showed mercy. "Not so," he said. "Whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, a sign known only to heaven, that no one should harm him. The wind rose again, carrying the sound of rustling leaves like a whisper of lament. Cain turned his face away from the land of his birth and walked eastward, his shadow stretching long before him. The fields that had once given him joy were now barren. Each step carried him farther from his family, farther from the voice of God that had once spoken softly in the cool of the day. He crossed rivers and valleys until he came to a place called Nod, the land of wandering, where the ground was hard and the nights were long. There he built a city, small and rough, naming it after his son, Enoch. Yet no wall or tower could hide the ache within him. The laughter of his child brought a fleeting comfort, but in his dreams he still saw Abel's face, gentle and forgiving. He would wake in the darkness and press his hands to his ears to block the sound of the earth crying beneath him. And still, God did not abandon him. For though Cain had shed innocent blood, the Creator's mercy lingered. Life continued to flow through his line, builders, musicians, those who shaped metal and wood. The mark of God was not only a warning but a reminder that even the fallen were not forgotten. East of Eden, humanity began to multiply, learning to live with both memory and promise. Meanwhile, far away, Adam and Eve mourned. The years had lined their faces, and their eyes, once filled with the light of Eden, were now dimmed by sorrow. They buried Abel with their own hands, laying him beneath the soil that had once yielded life. Eve wept without ceasing, her cries rising into the night. "This is the fruit of our sin," she said through her tears. "Our child lies cold because of what we brought into the world." Adam stood beside her, silent and broken. He remembered the words of God, "In the day you eat of it, you shall surely die." Now death was no longer a shadowed word but a reality that lay before them. And yet, even in their grief, a spark of hope remained. for the same God who had promised judgment had also promised redemption. The blood of Abel had cried out for justice, but somewhere beyond the horizon, the heart of God was already preparing an answer of mercy. In time, Eve bore another son. When she held him, her hands trembled, but her eyes lifted toward heaven. God has appointed for me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew, she said, and she named the child Seth. Adam took the boy in his arms, feeling the warmth of life against his chest, and for the first time in many years, he smiled. The sound of laughter returned to their tent, soft but real. Seth grew strong and wise, and through him, a new hope began to bloom. His children learned to call upon the name of the Lord, their voices rising into the sky like incense. The memory of Abel was not forgotten, nor was the pain of Cain erased, but faith began to take root again, fragile yet enduring. The world was no longer a garden, yet even in its brokenness, God's hand still guided it. The soil that had drunk the blood of the innocent would one day receive the blood of the Redeemer, and through that sacrifice, all would be restored. For though the cry of Abel's blood reached heaven demanding justice, the day would come when another blood would cry out louder still, not for vengeance, but for forgiveness. And the earth, which had once groaned under the weight of sin, would know peace again. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when the ground remembered the blood of the righteous, and heaven began to whisper the promise of redemption. The line of Seth, a new beginning. The years after Abel's death passed slowly, heavy with sorrow and silence. The world had changed, and so had the hearts of those who lived within it. The laughter that once filled Adam and Eve's dwelling was gone, replaced by the rustle of wind through fields that bore both thorns and wheat. Each sunrise reminded them of Eden, and each sunset whispered of loss. Yet through the ache of memory, hope flickered like a distant light. When Seth was born, that light grew stronger. Eve held her son close, and Adam watched him with reverence, sensing that this child carried something of heaven's mercy within him. God has appointed another seed for me, Eve said softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. For though one son was lost to death and another to wandering, his promise still stands. Seth grew in strength and wisdom, his eyes filled with gentleness. He listened when his father spoke of the garden, of the rivers, the fruit, and the voice that once walked with them in the cool of the day. Remember, Adam would say, we were made in his image. Though we fell, his image remains. The Lord is not far from those who seek him. And Seth listened well, carrying those words deep into his heart. As the years unfolded, the world began to change again. Children were born, and children's children after them, spreading across the valleys and mountains. They built homes from stone and wood, raised flocks, and learned the patterns of the stars. The memory of Eden became a story told beside fires, passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. But among the descendants of Cain, the memory faded quickly. His people grew strong and skilled but proud. They forged weapons, built cities, and filled them with the sound of music and iron. Their hearts sought power and pleasure, not God. The sons of men multiplied, but their wisdom diminished, and the earth grew darker with each passing generation. Yet among the line of Seth, the light still burned. Seth's son Enoch was the first to lift his voice and call upon the name of the Lord. Under the open sky, he built an altar of uncut stones and knelt before it, offering the fruit of the earth with a humble heart. His prayer rose like smoke into the heavens, and for the first time since Eden, worship returned to the world. The sound of his song drifted across the plain, and others joined him, their voices weaving together in praise and repentance. The angels looked upon them with wonder, for though mankind had fallen, faith had not died. Adam, now old and gray, watched this new beginning with tears in his eyes. "They remember," he said to Eve, his voice weary but full of peace. "Our children remember the Lord." Eve smiled faintly and looked to the horizon where the sun was setting. "Then there is still hope," she whispered. Adam lived to see many generations after him, and though his body weakened, his spirit remained strong. He would gather his family around him and speak of the Creator who had shaped them from dust and breath. He told them of the garden not as a tale of loss, but as a promise of what would one day be restored. "Do not forget," he said, "the Lord's mercy is greater than our sin. He has clothed us, fed us, and allowed us to live. One day, through our line, a Redeemer will come." His children listened, and some believed deeply, while others turned their hearts to the pleasures of the world. Adam's days numbered 930 years, and when he died, the earth mourned the man who had first walked with God. Eve's tears fell upon his grave, and she whispered, "You will rest until the day he calls you again." Then she too passed, her face peaceful, her eyes lifted toward the heavens. The generations continued. Enosh begot Kenan, Kenan begot Mahalalel, Mahalalel begot Jared, and the line stretched onward. Though death now touched every life, faith flowed quietly through those who still remembered the Creator. Among them arose a man named Enoch, whose heart was pure before the Lord. From his youth, he sought God in solitude, walking through the fields at dawn, listening for the whisper of heaven in the wind. When others turned to idols or forgot the name of the Lord, Enoch stood firm, teaching his children that righteousness was greater than riches, that truth was better than strength. And God saw his heart and was pleased. One evening, as Enoch walked among the hills, the sky seemed to open above him. The light of heaven touched the ground where he stood, and the voice of the Lord called his name. He did not fear, for the presence that filled the air was love itself. And the scriptures say, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. His family searched for him, but he was gone, taken alive into the presence of the one he loved. His story became a legend, a reminder that even in a fallen world, it was still possible to walk with God. The children of Seth told this story again and again, keeping the memory alive when darkness pressed close. But beyond the line of Seth, the sons of men grew restless. They built greater cities and filled them with violence. Giants walked among them, men of renown, mighty in strength but empty in spirit. The world began to divide, one path toward righteousness, the other toward ruin. Yet through it all, the Lord watched, his heart both sorrowful and steadfast. The seed of faith, planted in Seth's line, would not die. Though the earth trembled with sin, heaven's plan continued to unfold, unseen but unstoppable. And so the generations marched onward, each carrying the breath of the first man and the hope of redemption yet to come. The stars above bore witness, silent and eternal, as faith endured beneath their light. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when humanity remembered its Maker, and the line of Seth became the heartbeat of hope for a broken world. Enoch walked with God, the man who did not die. In the generations after Adam, when men began to multiply upon the earth and the sound of their labor filled the valleys, there lived a man named Enoch, son of Jared, born in the line of Seth. The world around him was growing dark, the sons of men built cities and altars not to the Creator but to their own glory. Violence spread through the land like a storm, and the memory of Eden had become only a whisper in the hearts of a few. Yet in that time of fading faith, Enoch's heart remained pure. From his youth, he sought after the God his fathers had spoken of. While others looked to the stars and worshipped the work of their own hands, Enoch saw in the heavens the reflection of their Maker. When the dawn broke over the hills, he would rise to meet it with prayer. He spoke to God not with sacrifice alone but with love, and in return, he felt the nearness of the Almighty like the breath of wind upon his face. His days were simple, yet filled with awe. He worked the soil, tended his flocks, and raised his family with a heart devoted to righteousness. His wife would often see him pause in the middle of his labor, eyes lifted toward the sky, as if listening to a voice beyond the clouds. When their son Methuselah was born, Enoch named him with meaning, "When he dies, it shall come," for through the Spirit of God, Enoch understood that judgment would one day fall upon the earth for its wickedness. Yet his heart did not harden. He prayed for mercy even for those who mocked the name of the Lord. He became a preacher of righteousness, speaking in the villages and valleys, warning that the ways of men were turning them from their Creator. Many laughed, some scorned, but a few listened. His words were like rain on parched soil, and the faithful found courage again. It was said that when Enoch prayed, the air itself seemed to grow still, as though the world leaned in to hear. Years passed, and Enoch's walk with God deepened beyond what others could understand. He did not merely worship from afar, he lived in communion with the Almighty. Each day he walked further into the presence of heaven, his heart lighter with every step. When storms raged and nations quarreled, he was at peace, for he had learned that the voice of God was stronger than the noise of the world. His friends noticed that he began to change, his eyes brighter, his words gentler, his very presence filled with calm. It was as though he carried a piece of Eden within him. He spoke often of the promise given to their fathers, that one day, a Redeemer would come, crushing the serpent's head and restoring what was lost. His faith was not bound to the world's corruption but anchored in eternity. People would come to him for counsel, and he would say, "The Lord still walks among us, though unseen. Seek him while he may be found, and the darkness shall not master you." Methuselah grew into manhood, and Enoch taught him to fear the Lord, to cherish justice and mercy. The two would walk together through the fields at dusk, their shadows stretching long across the ground. "Remember," Enoch would say, "life is not measured by its length but by its walk with God." And Methuselah, though he did not yet understand the depth of his father's communion, treasured every word. The world continued to decay, but the line of Seth held fast to faith. Then one morning, as the sun rose crimson over the mountains, Enoch awoke with a sense of stillness unlike any before. The world seemed hushed, waiting. He kissed his wife's forehead and smiled. "Today I go for a walk," he said softly. She looked at him with quiet understanding, for she had long sensed that her husband was destined for something beyond death. Enoch took his staff and walked out into the fields, the light of dawn painting the sky in gold. He walked as he always had, speaking with God, his heart full of peace. Step by step, the world around him seemed to fade, replaced by a brightness that did not belong to earth. The ground beneath his feet grew warm, the air sweet and weightless. He looked upward, and for the first time, he saw beyond the veil. The heavens opened, and light poured through like living fire. Voices of angels filled the air, singing in languages no mortal tongue could hold. Enoch felt no fear. He had walked with God all his life, now he simply walked home. Back in the village, people waited, but Enoch did not return. They searched the hills, the valleys, the rivers, but there was no trace of him. Only his staff lay by the stream where he had last been seen, the water flowing gently around it. And the people said, "The Lord has taken him." For God had received him alive, sparing him from the death that ruled the sons of men. In heaven, Enoch's name was spoken with joy, for he was the first of mankind to enter eternal life without tasting the grave. Methuselah mourned yet rejoiced, for though he had lost his father on earth, he knew he was alive with God. He built an altar where Enoch's staff had lain and offered a sacrifice of thanksgiving. The flame rose straight into the sky, and for a moment, the air shimmered with light, as if heaven smiled. The generations that followed remembered Enoch's story. Fathers told their sons of the man who walked with God and did not die. His name became a beacon of hope in a world growing ever darker, proof that death was not the end and that the favor of God still rested upon the faithful. Even as corruption spread across the earth, and the sons of Cain filled the world with violence, the memory of Enoch whispered through the night like a promise, that those who walk closely with the Creator will never truly be lost. His life became a prophecy of the life to come, the shadow of a greater salvation yet unseen. And so, the world moved on, each dawn carrying both beauty and decay, but somewhere, in the hearts of the righteous, Enoch's walk still echoed. His faith was the bridge between the first garden and the future kingdom, the living proof that God desires not sacrifice alone, but companionship. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when a man walked with God and stepped from earth into eternity, leaving behind a legacy that even death could not touch. The sons of God and the daughters of men, the corruption of the earth. The generations after Enoch multiplied, and the earth grew full of people, strong and skilled, but their hearts turned far from the one who had made them. The sons of men built cities of stone and bronze, their towers piercing the clouds, their music echoing through the valleys. They learned to shape metal into weapons, to tame fire, and to carve the likeness of gods from wood and gold. Yet the light of heaven dimmed in their souls. The stories of Eden became myths, the memory of the Creator a fading echo. Only a few still lifted their eyes toward heaven, the line of Seth, who remembered the Lord and kept his name upon their lips. But even among them, hearts began to wander. The sons of God, those who once walked in righteousness and carried the knowledge of the Holy One, looked upon the daughters of men, the children of Cain's line, and saw that they were fair. Desire conquered wisdom, and they took wives for themselves from all whom they chose. Thus began the mingling of light and darkness, of faith and rebellion. The world, once divided between the righteous and the wicked, now became one in corruption. The children born from these unions were mighty, giants of strength and pride, men of renown whose deeds filled the earth with awe and fear. They built great cities, ruled vast lands, and led nations into idolatry. Songs were sung of their valor, but heaven wept, for their hearts were hardened. They called themselves heroes, but their glory was violence. Blood stained the rivers, and injustice covered the land like smoke. The cries of the oppressed rose to the heavens, and the earth groaned beneath the weight of sin. The Lord looked down upon his creation, and the heart of God was grieved. He saw that the wickedness of man was great, and that every imagination of his thoughts was only evil continually. The beauty of creation had been twisted into corruption, the harmony of life had turned to chaos. Even the beasts grew wild and cruel, reflecting the fall of their masters. Yet among the darkness, one light remained, a man named Noah, descendant of Seth, righteous and humble, walking with God as Enoch once had. His eyes were clear, his hands honest, his heart steady in faith. While others feasted and fought, Noah prayed. He tended his fields, raised his sons, and built his home in peace. His neighbors mocked him for his devotion, calling him old and foolish, but he answered only with kindness. The Lord watched him and was pleased, for in Noah he saw a remnant of what mankind was meant to be. And the word of the Lord came to him in the quiet of the night, carried on the wind that whispered through the cedars. But before that moment, the world continued to sink deeper into corruption. The mighty men of old, whom the people called gods, began to wage wars for dominion. Cities burned, temples rose to idols shaped in their image, and songs of blasphemy replaced songs of praise. The sky grew dim with smoke from endless sacrifices to false deities, and the laughter of children faded in the shadow of violence. Women were taken by force, the weak were enslaved, and the strong became cruel. Even nature itself seemed to recoil, the seasons shifted, storms grew fierce, and the rivers overflowed their banks. The balance of the earth had been broken. Heaven could bear it no longer. The Lord spoke, and his voice rolled like thunder over creation. My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The decree went forth unseen, a countdown written in the fabric of time. The angels looked upon the earth and wept, for the beauty they had sung over at creation was now scarred beyond recognition. And yet, in the midst of judgment, there was mercy, for the Lord would not destroy without first making a way of salvation. One night, as Noah knelt in prayer beneath the stars, the presence of God came upon him like fire and wind. Noah, the voice said, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. But you, make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make rooms in it and cover it inside and out with pitch. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. Thus you shall preserve life. Noah bowed his head to the ground, trembling but not afraid. As you command, Lord, he said. And the Lord looked upon him with favor. From that night onward, Noah began to build. The sound of hammers and saws filled the valley as the great ark took shape, a vessel of salvation rising amid a world of ruin. The people came to see it, laughing and mocking. What madness is this, they jeered. You build a ship where there is no sea. But Noah said, the flood will come. Turn from your wickedness. Seek the Lord while there is still time. They laughed louder, their hearts hardened. But Noah continued, day after day, year after year, faithful in every task. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, worked beside him, though even they sometimes struggled to understand the magnitude of their father's calling. Yet the Spirit of God strengthened them, and the work continued. As the ark rose against the horizon, a strange stillness fell upon creation. The birds flew lower, the beasts grew restless, and the skies darkened more often. The heavens were preparing for judgment, though mankind was blind to the signs. Noah's hands, cracked and calloused, did not cease their labor. He knew the time of grace was short. In the evenings, he would look to the west where the sun bled red across the sky and whisper, "Soon, Lord. Let your will be done." And so the world marched toward its reckoning, proud and unrepentant. The giants feasted in their halls of stone, kings crowned themselves as gods, and no one remembered the voice that had once walked in the garden. The patience of heaven had reached its end, but the mercy of God had already built its refuge. Evening passed, and morning came, the day before the flood, when man's pride reached the heavens, and one man's faith began to prepare the ark of salvation. Noah's ark, the vessel of salvation. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the air carried a weight that no one could name. For 120 years, Noah had built the great ark, plank by plank, beam by beam, under the eyes of a mocking world. His hands were rough, his back bent with labor, yet his spirit never broke. Day after day he preached, warning the people that judgment would come, that the earth itself would be cleansed. But their laughter only grew louder. They called him mad, the builder of a ship in the dry land, a prophet of rain where no storm had ever come. Children pointed and laughed, men passed by shaking their heads. Yet Noah lifted his eyes toward heaven and whispered, "Your will be done, O Lord." For the voice that spoke to him had not been of man, and its truth burned brighter than mockery. The ark stood immense upon the plain, a mountain of wood sealed with pitch inside and out. Its door faced the east, and its window opened toward heaven. Within were rooms for every creature, great and small, for the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the earth. Food was gathered in store, grain upon grain, fruit upon fruit, enough for all who would enter. And still the world laughed. Then came the day when the Lord spoke again, "Noah, enter the ark, you and all your house, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast you shall take by sevens, male and female, and of beasts that are not clean, 2, of birds also by sevens, to keep their seed alive upon the earth. For after 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the ground." Noah bowed low, and tears filled his eyes. He gathered his family, his wife, his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, and they entered the ark. The animals came as if called by an unseen hand. Lions walked beside lambs, eagles circled and descended, serpents glided silently. The ground trembled under their steps as they entered the great vessel 2 by 2, led not by man but by the breath of God. The people watched in awe, their laughter faltering. Some whispered that perhaps the old man's words were true, but pride chained their hearts. None sought refuge. On the 7th day, a stillness fell unlike any before. The sky turned black though it was morning. The wind died, and the birds grew silent. Then, from the heavens, the first drop fell, a sound small yet terrible. Then another, and another, until the sky opened its gates and the waters poured down in fury. Lightning split the clouds, and thunder rolled like the voice of judgment. The fountains of the great deep burst forth, rivers rose and swallowed the valleys. The people ran to the hills, shouting Noah's name, but it was too late. For the hand of the Lord had closed the door of the ark. Inside, Noah knelt in prayer as the sound of rain became a roar. The ark trembled, lifted from the ground, and began to drift upon the waters. The cries of men and beasts filled the air, echoing for miles, then faded into silence beneath the endless storm. 40 days and 40 nights the rain fell, unbroken. The mountains disappeared, the forests vanished beneath the waves. The earth, once filled with violence, was now an ocean of sorrow. But within the ark there was peace. Noah and his family moved among the creatures, feeding them, tending them, praying as the vessel creaked and swayed. The smell of cedar and pitch filled the air, and the faint light that entered through the window seemed like a blessing from heaven. Noah's wife would sometimes place her hand upon his shoulder and whisper, "Will the waters ever cease?" And he would answer, "The Lord remembers us. He who called us in will call us out again." His faith was their anchor, and his voice their comfort. As the days passed, the storm began to fade. The clouds broke, and rays of light pierced through the mist. The rain ceased, but the waters still covered the face of the earth. For 150 days the ark drifted, silent upon the deep. The world beneath was gone, buried beneath the waves. Noah would stand by the window each dawn, looking out across the endless expanse, and he would pray. His words rose with the wind, unseen but heard. And God remembered Noah. A great wind blew upon the waters, and they began to recede. The fountains of the deep were stopped, and the heavens closed. The ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. When Noah felt the vessel settle, he bowed his head in thanksgiving. After many days, he opened the window and sent out a raven, and it flew to and fro until the waters were dried from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove, but the dove found no place to rest and returned to him. 7 days later, he sent the dove again, and it came back in the evening, carrying in its beak an olive leaf plucked fresh from the branch. Noah smiled, and tears filled his eyes. "Peace," he whispered, "the earth breathes again." 7 days more, and he sent the dove a third time, and it did not return, for it had found a new world waiting. Then Noah opened the great door, and sunlight poured in, pure and golden. He stepped out upon the ground that was still damp with dew, the air cool and sweet. The mountains stood clean, the valleys quiet, and the silence of a new beginning filled the world. Noah built an altar and took of every clean beast and bird, and offered burnt offerings upon it. The smoke rose into the sky, and the Lord smelled the sweet savor of faith and mercy. And God said in his heart, "I will not again curse the ground for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." And God set his bow in the clouds, a sign of covenant between heaven and earth. The storm had ended, the judgment was fulfilled, and from the ark of wood rose the promise of grace. The same hands that built the vessel of salvation now lifted them toward heaven in gratitude. Evening passed, and morning came, the first day of the new world. The covenant of the rainbow, God's promise renewed. The air was still and pure as Noah stepped from the ark, his feet sinking softly into the damp earth. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a world reborn, silent, clean, and trembling with new life. The sky stretched wide and blue above the mountains of Ararat, and the scent of fresh soil and pine drifted through the air. For the first time in many months, the sound of birds filled the heavens again. Eagles soared above the peaks, and doves cooed among the rocks. The beasts, once restless within the ark, now walked freely across the fields, their paws pressing into the mud of the new beginning. Noah stood in awe, his heart heavy with gratitude. Around him were his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, the only living souls on all the earth. Behind them, the great ark rested like a monument of mercy, weathered and silent, its purpose fulfilled. Noah raised his hands toward heaven and fell to his knees. He gathered stones and built an altar to the Lord, the first altar of the new world. Upon it he placed clean beasts and birds and offered them in sacrifice. The smoke rose in gentle spirals, curling into the sky, and the air shimmered with the warmth of devotion. The fragrance of the offering mingled with the morning breeze, and heaven itself seemed to breathe it in. And the Lord looked upon Noah's offering and was pleased. The judgment was finished, the storm had passed, but mercy endured. God said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Then the voice of the Lord came to Noah, gentle yet mighty, echoing across the mountains. Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall be upon every beast, and into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, even as I gave you the green herb, so I give you all things. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For the life of every creature is in its blood, and I will require it. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man. Noah listened with bowed head, the words burning deep into his spirit. They were not merely commands, they were the foundation of the new world, a sacred covenant between heaven and humanity. Then God spoke again, Behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your sons after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And as he spoke, the clouds began to gather, soft and luminous, and sunlight broke through them in radiant streams. Across the sky, a great arc of color appeared, red, gold, green, and violet, shimmering with the breath of heaven. Noah and his family gazed upward in wonder. The light of the rainbow touched the mountains and the waters below, and the world seemed to hold its breath. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring a cloud over the earth and the bow is seen in the cloud, I will remember my covenant between me and you, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. Tears filled Noah's eyes as the light reflected in them. His sons stood silent beside him, their faces glowing with awe. The rainbow stretched from horizon to horizon, a bridge of promise connecting earth and heaven. It was not only a sign for man to see, but for God himself to remember, a bond sealed in mercy. The storm had brought judgment, but the bow brought peace. The colors seemed alive, pulsing with divine warmth, and Noah's heart swelled with hope. For though man's nature was still flawed, God's love was greater than his sin. The rainbow would speak of that love for every generation to come. As the days passed, the land began to flourish. The rivers found their courses again, the trees sprouted new leaves, and grass covered the hills like a garment. Noah and his sons built homes from the wood of the ark, and vineyards were planted in the valleys. Life began to fill the world once more. But even in this new creation, the shadow of the old remained, for sin still clung to the heart of man. One day, Noah drank of the wine from his vineyard and became drunk, lying uncovered in his tent. His son Ham saw his father's shame and mocked, while Shem and Japheth, walking backward with a garment upon their shoulders, covered him without looking. When Noah woke, he knew what had been done. He blessed Shem and Japheth for their honor but cursed the seed of Ham, saying, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." Thus even in the new world, the seeds of division were sown again. Yet the covenant of God did not waver. The bow still shone in the heavens, reminding all who saw it that mercy triumphs over wrath. The earth was alive with promise, and the lineage of faith continued through Shem, from whom the chosen people would one day come. Noah lived long after the flood, teaching his children the ways of the Lord, telling them of the garden, of the fall, of the flood, and of the God who never forgets his word. His voice became the link between the first creation and the covenant of renewal. As the sun set one evening and the rainbow arched once more across the sky, Noah stood outside his dwelling, leaning on his staff. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of rain. He smiled faintly, remembering the voice that had once called him to build the ark. "You kept your promise," he murmured. "You remember." And in that moment, the world seemed to glow again with divine peace. Evening passed, and morning came, the day of the covenant, when the sky itself became a scroll upon which God wrote his eternal promise, that mercy would always follow judgment, and that his bow would forever shine over the earth. The Tower of Babel, the pride of man. The sons of Noah spread across the new earth, their tents stretching from the mountains of Ararat to the wide plains of the east. The valleys were green again, the rivers full, and the sound of children's laughter echoed where once there had been silence. For a time, mankind lived in peace beneath the sign of the rainbow, united by one language and one speech. They worked together, traded, and built homes from stone and clay. The memory of the flood was still fresh in their hearts, and for a generation, fear of the Lord kept them humble. But as the years passed, fear turned to forgetfulness, and forgetfulness to pride. The people journeyed eastward until they came to a vast plain in the land of Shinar, rich and fertile, watered by rivers that shimmered like silver beneath the sun. There they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." They had learned to harden clay in fire until it became strong as stone, and they used bitumen for mortar. As they built, they looked upon their work and said, "Behold, what power is in our hands. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered upon the face of the earth." Thus began the great project of man, a monument not to God, but to his own glory. Day and night the plain rang with the sound of labor. Kills roared like dragons, the air thick with smoke and dust. Thousands gathered to shape bricks, to carry them upon their backs, to lift them upon scaffolds that rose higher each day. The tower climbed toward the clouds, a column of pride scraping the heavens. The people marveled at their work, saying, "Surely nothing is impossible to us. We shall dwell in the skies and be as gods." They had forgotten the flood, the covenant, and the bow that still curved above them. Their hearts, once humble before the Creator, now beat with arrogance. From the heights of heaven, the Lord looked down upon the city and the tower. The smoke from their furnaces rose into the sky like a dark offering, and the sound of their hammers echoed through the clouds. The Lord said, "Behold, The people are one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. Now nothing they propose will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. The hosts of heaven descended, unseen by mortal eyes, moving like wine through the ranks of the builders. As the morning sun rose over Shinar, the workmen shouted orders, but their words suddenly twisted upon their tongues. One spoke, and another frowned, hearing nonsense. A man called for water, but his helper brought stone. Another asked for mortar, but was handed straw. Confusion spread like wildfire. Voices clashed in strange tones, familiar words turned foreign, and anger filled the air. The unity that had raised the tower was shattered in an instant. They argued, shouted, and struck one another, no longer brothers but strangers. The work ceased. Bricks fell from trembling hands. The scaffold stood empty, echoing with the sound of chaos. The mighty tower, unfinished, cast a long shadow over a broken people. Families gathered in small groups, each speaking a language of their own, unable to understand the rest. Some fled east, some west, some north and south, their tongues shaping the first nations of the world. The city they had built they called Babel, for there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the people were scattered, each carrying their pride and confusion to distant lands. The plain of Shinar grew silent, the tower left standing like a monument to folly, a broken spear pointed toward heaven. Noah's descendants spread far and wide. Some built cities near rivers, others in the shadow of mountains. They carried with them fragments of the old story, of the flood, the ark, the rainbow, yet each retold it in their own tongue, until truth became legend. The unity of mankind had been lost, but so too was the seed of their arrogance. The Lord had humbled the nations, teaching them once more that heaven could not be reached by stone or will, but only by faith. Yet among the scattered tribes, one line remained faithful, the line of Shem. From his descendants would one day rise a man named Abram, who would again hear the voice of God calling him out of the world's confusion to walk the path of promise. But for now, the earth was quiet, resting after the noise of man's ambition. The tower stood as a scar against the sky, its summit crumbled, its base covered with vines. In the evenings, the wind whistled through its hollow chambers like a lament, carrying the sound of many tongues blending into one, the echo of what had been lost. Generations later, wanderers would come upon the ruins and speak of the city that tried to touch the heavens. They would see the broken stones and say, "Here the Lord himself came down." And they would remember, for a moment, that no power of man can ascend to God, only God descends to man. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when heaven scattered the proud and taught the world that the highest towers fall, but the humble heart endures forever. The call of Abram, the beginning of promise. The world had settled after the scattering of Babel. Nations had risen and fallen upon the plains, each with its own tongue, gods, and dreams. Among them, in the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, there lived a man named Abram, son of Terah, a shepherd and keeper of flocks. His days were peaceful but empty, surrounded by idols of stone and wood that men bowed before but which never spoke. The nights in Ur were filled with the glow of temples and the chants of priests, but Abram's heart felt no peace in their shadows. He would often walk alone beneath the stars, lifting his eyes to the heavens and wondering who had set them there. The gods of his father were silent, but the heavens were not. One night, as the world lay still and the wind brushed softly over the desert sands, a voice came, not from earth, but from beyond the stars. "Abram," it said, and his heart trembled within him, for the sound carried both power and tenderness. "Leave your country, your kindred, and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Abram fell to his knees, the weight of the divine presence pressing upon him like light. He did not see the face of the one who spoke, yet he knew with certainty, this was the true God, the maker of heaven and earth. The idols of you are shattered in his heart at that moment, and a new fire of faith was born within him. At dawn, he told Sarai, his wife, of the vision. Her eyes were full of both fear and wonder, but she saw the certainty in his face and said, "Where he leads, we will go." Terah, his father, gathered their household, their servants, and their herds, and they set out toward the land of Canaan. They journeyed through Haran, where Terah grew old and died, but Abram pressed on, carrying the promise in his heart. The road was long and harsh, the sun beat down upon them by day, and the nights were cold beneath the stars. Yet each dawn, Abram felt the same voice whisper to him, guiding his steps, "Fear not, Abram. I am with you." When they reached the land of Canaan, the hills rolled before them, green and golden, the rivers bright and alive. The Lord appeared to Abram again and said, "To your seed I will give this land." Abram built an altar there, on the plain of Shechem, beneath the oak of Moreh, and he called upon the name of the Lord. The wind stirred the branches above him as if heaven itself answered. From there he journeyed south, building another altar between Bethel and Ai, and again he prayed, his voice rising like incense. The people of the land watched him, this stranger who built altars not to their gods but to one unseen, and they wondered at his faith. But faith is always tested. A famine struck the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the ground of Canaan grew dry and barren. Egypt was rich and full of life, its rivers wide and its temples shining. Yet Abram felt uneasy among its gods and kings. Sarai was fair and radiant, and when they entered the land, he feared that Pharaoh would desire her and slay him. So he said, "Say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me for your sake." And so it was that Pharaoh took Sarai into his house, and Abram's heart was pierced with guilt. But the Lord was faithful. Plagues came upon Pharaoh's house, and the truth was revealed. The king called Abram before him and said, "Why have you done this thing? Take your wife and go." Abram departed with Sarai, his flocks, and all his goods, and he bowed low in repentance before the Lord. "You are merciful beyond measure," he whispered. "You keep your promise though I stumble." When he returned to Canaan, he was richer in flocks but humbler in spirit. His nephew Lot traveled with him, and their herds grew so vast that the land could not support them both. Their herdsmen quarreled, and Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between us, for we are brethren. If you go to the left, I will go to the right." Lot lifted his eyes and saw the plain of Jordan, well-watered and fertile like the garden of the Lord, and he chose it for himself, dwelling near the city of Sodom. Abram remained in the hill country of Canaan, content with what the Lord had given him. And again, the voice of God came to him, saying, "Lift up your eyes, and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever. Arise, walk through the land, for I have given it to you." Abram's heart swelled with awe, and he built another altar and worshipped. In those days, kings rose and fell, and wars broke out among the nations. Lot was taken captive when Sodom was plundered, and when Abram heard it, he gathered his trained servants, 318 in number, and pursued the kings who had taken him. By night they struck, and by dawn, Abram returned victorious, rescuing Lot and recovering all the goods and people. As he came back, the king of Salem, Melchizedek, priest of God Most High, brought out bread and wine and blessed him, saying, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth." And Abram gave him a tenth of all he had. It was the first meeting between heaven's priest and the father of faith, a foreshadowing of a greater covenant yet to come. That night, the Lord appeared to Abram once more in a vision and said, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield, your exceeding great reward." But Abram said, "Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I have no child? You have given me no seed, and the steward of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And the Lord said, "This man shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir." He brought Abram outside and said, "Look now toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to count them. So shall your descendants be." And Abram believed the Lord, and it was counted to him for righteousness. He fell upon his face and worshipped, and the Lord spoke again, saying, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land." Abram built another altar and called it the Lord who sees. The stars above shone brighter that night, as if rejoicing in the faith of one man. The journey had only begun, but the promise was eternal. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when God called a man out of the world to begin a covenant that would bless all nations and bring forth the hope of salvation. The covenant of blood, God's promise sealed. The years passed slowly upon the hills of Canaan. Abram's tent stood among the oaks of Mamre, his flocks grazing in the wide valleys, his servants moving like shadows beneath the sun. The promise of God still burned within his heart, yet his hair had turned gray, and his hands trembled with age. Each night he would step outside his tent and gaze upon the stars, recalling the words spoken long ago, "Look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able. So shall your descendants be." But the heavens were silent, and Sarai's womb remained empty. Still, Abram believed. Faith had become his breath, his sustenance, his strength. Yet one night, as the wind whispered across the fields and the fire burned low, the voice of the Lord came again, deep and luminous, filling the air like the sound of eternity. "Fear not, Abram," said the Lord, "I am your shield, your exceeding great reward." Abram fell to his knees and cried, "Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? The steward of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Behold, you have given me no seed." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man shall not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body shall be your heir." God brought Abram out beneath the open sky and said again, "Look now toward heaven and number the stars. So shall your descendants be." And Abram believed the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Then God said, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to possess." And Abram answered, "Lord God, how shall I know that I will possess it?" The Lord said, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a she-goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle-dove, and a young pigeon." Abram obeyed. He took the animals, divided them in halves, and laid each piece opposite the other, but did not divide the birds. He waited until the sun began to set, and a deep sleep fell upon him. Darkness covered the land, and a dreadful stillness filled the air. Then a voice spoke from the midst of the shadows, saying, "Know for certain that your descendants shall be strangers in a land that is not theirs and shall serve them, and they shall be afflicted 400 years. But afterward, they shall come out with great possessions, and in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." As the sun went down and night fell, a smoking furnace and a blazing torch appeared, moving between the pieces of the sacrifice. The light flickered upon Abram's face as he lay trembling, for he understood, the Lord himself was passing between the pieces, sealing his covenant not with words alone but with his very presence. And the Lord said, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates." When Abram awoke, dawn was breaking, and the smoke of the sacrifice still rose into the pale sky. He fell to his face in awe, for he knew the promise was sealed by God's own hand. But time continued, and Sarai's patience wore thin. She saw the years pass and her womb remain barren. In her grief, she said to Abram, "Behold now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing. Go unto my maid Hagar, perhaps I shall obtain children by her." Abram listened and took Hagar, and she conceived. But when Hagar saw that she had conceived, she looked with pride upon her mistress, and Sarai's heart burned with bitterness. She cried to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your bosom, and now she despises me." Abram answered, "Your maid is in your hand, do to her as you please." Sarai dealt harshly with her, and Hagar fled into the wilderness. There, by a spring of water, the angel of the Lord found her and said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She replied, "I flee from the face of my mistress." The angel said, "Return to her and submit yourself under her hand. I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be numbered for multitude." And the angel added, "Behold, you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction." Hagar returned and bore Abram a son, and Abram called his name Ishmael. He loved the boy, though he knew in his heart that Ishmael was not the promised heir. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared again and said, "I am Almighty God, walk before me and be blameless. I will make my covenant between me and you and multiply you exceedingly." Abram fell on his face, and God spoke, "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of many nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude. And as for Sarai, her name shall be Sarah, and I will bless her and give you a son by her. She shall be a mother of nations, kings of peoples shall come from her." Abraham bowed low, but laughter rose in his heart, not of mockery, but of wonder. "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old?" he thought. But God said, "Sarah your wife shall bear you a son indeed, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him, for an everlasting covenant with his descendants after him." Then the Lord said to Abraham, "This is my covenant which you shall keep, every male among you shall be circumcised. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old shall be circumcised, every male throughout your generations. My covenant shall be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant." Abraham obeyed that very day, and the blood of obedience sealed what faith had begun. The covenant was not only written in heaven but marked upon the body of God's chosen people. When evening came, Abraham sat outside his tent, watching the stars. The wind moved softly through the oaks, carrying the scent of the earth after rain. He touched the mark upon his flesh and closed his eyes. The voice of God had changed his name, his destiny, and the course of all mankind. He remembered the torch that had passed between the pieces, the voice that had promised a son, and the unshakable peace that had followed. "You are faithful," he whispered. "Your word is life." And above him, the stars shimmered like countless promises yet to be fulfilled. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when God sealed his covenant in blood, and the man once called Abram became Abraham, the father of faith and the bearer of divine promise. Visitors from heaven, the promise of Isaac. The sun stood high over the plains of Mamre, and the air shimmered with heat. Abraham sat at the door of his tent, the oaks around him whispering in the faint desert wind. He was old now, his beard white as sand, his hands lined with the years of wandering in faith. The camp was quiet, the servants rested, and the flocks grazed lazily nearby. Yet as Abraham shaded his eyes and looked toward the horizon, he saw 3 figures approaching from the distance, walking slowly beneath the glare of the sun. Their steps were steady, their garments gleaming faintly with a light not of this world. Without hesitation, Abraham rose and ran to meet them, bowing himself to the ground before them. "My Lord," he said, his voice trembling with reverence, "if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought to wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves before you go on your way." The strangers looked upon him, and one, whose eyes held both the gentleness of man and the majesty of heaven, nodded. "Do as you have said." Abraham hastened to the tent and said to Sarah, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth." Then he ran to the herd, chose a tender calf, and gave it to a servant to prepare. Butter, milk, and the roasted meat were set before the visitors, and Abraham stood by under the tree as they ate. The air around them was filled with peace, as if creation itself had paused to listen. Then the one who sat in the center turned to Abraham and said, "Where's Sarah your wife?" And he answered, "Behold, in the tent." The visitor smiled, a smile that seemed to carry eternity within it, and said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son." Inside the tent, Sarah heard the words. Her hands froze over the kneaded dough, and she laughed softly to herself, whispering, "After I am old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" Her heart was weary from years of waiting, and her laughter was tinged with disbelief. But the Lord heard her, and he said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, and Sarah shall have a son." Sarah, afraid, stepped out and said, "I did not laugh." But he looked upon her with eyes that saw truth itself and said gently, "No, but you did laugh." Yet in his tone there was no wrath, only the mercy of one who knows the frailty of human hope. The moment passed like a breath of wind, and Sarah stood silent, the echo of his words burning in her heart. When the meal was finished, the 3 men rose to go, and Abraham walked with them to see them off. They turned their gaze toward the distant valley, where the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah shimmered beneath the sun. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice. Then the Lord spoke, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grievous. I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry that has come to me, if not, I will know. The two others turned and walked toward the plain, but Abraham stood still before the Lord. He bowed low, trembling yet bold in his faith, and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city, will you destroy it and not spare the place for their sake? The Lord replied, If I find 50 righteous in Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham took courage and spoke again, Behold, I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 are lacking, will you destroy the city for lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Abraham persisted, Suppose 40 are found there? The Lord answered, For 40's sake I will not do it. Again he said, Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there? I will not destroy it if I find 30. Behold, said Abraham, I have dared to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there? For 20's sake I will not destroy it. Then Abraham said, his voice soft and pleading, O let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 are found there? And the Lord said, For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Then the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his tent, the wind whispering through the trees like the sigh of judgment approaching. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the stars beyond the tent's opening. The words of the heavenly visitor echoed in her mind. Is anything too hard for the Lord? She touched her aged hands to her face, feeling the lines of time, the weight of years. Yet beneath her weariness stirred a spark of life, a hope reborn. She closed her eyes and smiled, not with disbelief but with quiet wonder. For the first time in many years, she whispered her husband's name not in sorrow but in faith. Abraham, she said softly, he spoke, and I believe. Outside, Abraham gazed at the heavens, remembering the promise sealed in blood, the covenant that could not be broken. The stars above seemed to multiply before his eyes, 1,000 for every doubt he had ever known. He felt the nearness of God once more, the same presence that had called him from Ur, that had walked with him through famine and fear, that had bound his word to Abraham's very flesh. And now, that same voice had promised life from a barren womb. The camp grew silent. The 3 visitors were gone, vanished into the horizon, but their presence lingered like a fragrance in the air. The oaks of Mamre stood still, their branches glistening with morning dew as the first light of dawn touched the land. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when heaven visited earth, and the laughter of promise began to stir in the hearts of Abraham and Sarah. Judgment on Sodom, fire from heaven. The sun was setting beyond the hills when 2 of the heavenly visitors reached the gates of Sodom. The city glowed red in the fading light, its towers sharp against the horizon, its streets alive with noise and corruption. Lot, Abraham's nephew, sat by the gate as he often did, weary but watchful. When he saw the strangers approach, he rose quickly and bowed himself with reverence. My lords, he said, turn in, I pray you, to your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go your way. The men answered, No, we will spend the night in the open square. But Lot urged them strongly, for he knew the evil that lurked after dark in that place. So they entered his house, and he made them a feast of unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, both young and old, surrounded the house. Their laughter was cruel, their hearts darkened with sin. They shouted, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may defile them." Lot went out to the doorway, shutting the door behind him, his voice trembling. "I beg you, brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please, only do not harm these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." But the mob roared in anger, pressing against him, crying, "Stand aside. This one came to live among us, and now he judges us." They lunged forward to break the door, but the visitors reached out their hands, pulled Lot inside, and struck the men outside with blindness so that they groped helplessly in the street until the night swallowed them. Then the visitors said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons, daughters, sons-in-law? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy it. The outcry against it has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to bring it down." Lot went to warn his sons-in-law, saying, "Up! Get out of this city, for the Lord will destroy it." But they laughed, thinking he was jesting. At dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." Still he lingered, his heart torn between love and fear. Then the men took him by the hand, and his wife, and his daughters. The mercy of the Lord was upon him, and they brought them out of the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be consumed." But Lot said, "Oh, my lords, behold, I cannot escape to the mountain lest some evil overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, it is a little one, let me escape there, and my soul shall live." And the angel said, "See, I grant you this favor also, I will not overthrow the small city you speak of. Hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive." Therefore, the city was called Zor. The sky was gray with the light of morning when Lot entered Zor. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from heaven. The ground trembled, and the heavens blazed with fury. Flames rose like pillars, the air filled with the sound of roaring wind and the cries of men. The cities of the plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, became a sea of fire, their pride consumed, their beauty turned to ashes. From afar, Abraham rose early and looked toward the plain, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a great furnace. His heart was heavy, for though the Lord had spared Lot, judgment had fallen as promised. As Lot fled, the memory of the life he had left behind pressed upon his wife. The city had been her home, her comfort, her world. Though warned not to look back, she turned her eyes toward Sodom, toward the burning towers and the memories now lost, and in that moment she became a pillar of salt, frozen between mercy and disobedience. The wind howled through the plain, scattering the ashes of the cities, and the salt of her body gleamed white beneath the rising sun, a monument to longing and unbelief. Lot trembled and did not look again. He and his daughters went up from Zor and dwelt in a cave in the mountains. There, in the shadow of God's wrath and mercy, silence returned. The fire had ceased, the smoke drifted away, and the once proud cities were gone, buried beneath the dust of the valley. The land that had been called paradise became desolation, a scar upon the earth. And yet, from that desolation, the mercy of God endured, for he had remembered Abraham and saved Lot out of the overthrow. Abraham stood upon the hill, the wind lifting his robes, the scent of ash filling the air. He gazed long at the horizon where the flames still smoldered, and his heart trembled between sorrow and reverence. "Righteous are you, O Lord," he whispered, "for you do not destroy without cause, nor forget mercy and wrath." The morning light broke across the plain, golden and solemn, and the rainbow that once promised life still shimmered faintly above the smoke, a sign that even in judgment, grace remains. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when heaven's fire cleansed the earth, and the justice of God burned brighter than the pride of man. The birth of Isaac, laughter of promise. The years passed quietly in the tents of Abraham. The smoke of Sodom's destruction had long faded into the memory of dust, and the plains of Mamre were peaceful again beneath the wide, eternal sky. Abraham had grown older, his face lined with both wisdom and waiting, his heart still anchored in the promise spoken so many years ago. The covenant was carved into his very flesh, the mark of faith that would not fade, but his eyes still sought the fulfillment of that one word, the child that heaven had promised. Sarah too had grown gray, her hands slower, her eyes softer, yet in her heart the echo of divine laughter still stirred, the laughter of disbelief that had turned, in secret, to hope. One morning, as the camp stirred to life, Sarah felt something within her, a quickening, a spark of warmth unlike any she had ever known. She pressed her hand to her body and gasped, her eyes filling with tears. The impossible had begun. The barren womb of an old woman had become the cradle of life. She hid her joy for a time, as if afraid that speaking it aloud might break the fragile wonder within her, but when Abraham looked upon her, he saw it in her eyes, the glow, the peace, the miracle. He fell upon his knees, his heart pounding like the wings of a bird, and whispered, "The Lord is faithful. He has remembered his word." The days turned into months, and the tents of Abraham were filled with songs and laughter. Servants whispered in awe, shepherds spread the news across the hills, and strangers passing by spoke of the God who opens the womb and fulfills his promise even in old age. Sarah's body was weary, but her spirit burned with joy. She would often sit by the entrance of her tent in the cool of the evening, her hands resting on her growing belly, and her thoughts drifting to that moment when the heavenly visitor had said, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Each time she remembered, she smiled, not with doubt, but with the quiet confidence of one who has seen the impossible become real. And then the day came. The sun rose golden over the plains, and the air was still as if creation itself held its breath. Sarah's cry echoed through the camp, followed by silence, and then, the cry of a newborn child. Abraham rushed into the tent, his eyes wet with tears. There in Sarah's arms lay the son of promise, tiny and perfect, his skin soft as morning light. Sarah looked up at her husband, her face radiant, and said, "God has made me to laugh, so that all who hear will laugh with me." Abraham lifted the child and held him close, his hands trembling. "His name shall be Isaac," he said, "for the Lord has brought laughter to our house." The camp rejoiced that day. The servants sang, the flocks grazed in peace, and Abraham built an altar and offered a sacrifice of thanksgiving. Smoke rose into the clear sky, curling like praise toward the heavens. "You are faithful, O Lord," he prayed, "your promises never fail." You remember mercy to the humble and strength to those who believe. Sarah stood beside him, watching the smoke rise, her son cradled in her arms. Her laughter, once born of disbelief, had become the music of faith. Isaac grew, strong and bright-eyed, the joy of his parents' old age. His laughter filled the camp like birdsong at dawn. Abraham watched him run among the tents, his small feet kicking up dust, his voice calling out with innocence and life. Each step was a reminder that God's word endures. But as joy filled their days, shadows of the past lingered. Ishmael, the son of Hagar, had grown into a young man, proud, restless, watching the child of promise with jealous eyes. The day came when Abraham made a great feast to celebrate Isaac's weaning. The camp was alive with laughter, song, and dancing, yet among the joy, Sarah's gaze turned toward Ishmael. She saw him mocking Isaac, his laughter sharp and cruel. Her heart burned, not with hatred but with the fierce protectiveness of a mother guarding what heaven had given. She turned to Abraham and said, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, with Isaac." Abraham's heart was torn. He loved Ishmael, his firstborn, the boy who had run at his side through the desert winds, but he could not ignore Sarah's words, for the Spirit of God echoed them in his heart. That night, Abraham sat in silence beneath the stars, the same stars God had once shown him when he spoke the promise. The Lord came to him and said, "Let it not be grievous in your sight because of the lad and because of your bondwoman. In all that Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac shall your seed be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed." So Abraham rose early in the morning, his heart heavy with sorrow. He gave Hagar bread and a skin of water and placed them upon her shoulder, and with the boy she departed into the wilderness of Beersheba. Abraham watched them until they were but shadows against the sand, then turned away, his tears falling upon the earth. Yet even in grief, his heart whispered, "God is faithful still." Days passed, and peace returned to the camp. Isaac grew in wisdom and strength, his laughter still bright as sunlight. Sarah watched him with wonder, her soul overflowing with gratitude. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? She often whispered. Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And Abraham, each time he looked upon the boy, felt his faith renewed. He knew that the same God who brought life to a barren womb could bring forth nations from this one child. The covenant lived through Isaac, the laughter of heaven dwelling among men. His birth was not only the fulfillment of a promise but the beginning of a greater one, a thread of grace that would stretch through generations, leading to a day when another child of promise would be born, through whom all nations of the earth would truly be blessed. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when faith turned to sight, and laughter became the voice of God's eternal joy. The test of Abraham, the offering of Isaac. The days of peace in Abraham's camp stretched like golden threads beneath the heavens. Isaac had grown into a young man, strong in spirit and gentle in heart, the pride and joy of his father's old age. The laughter that once filled the tents had become deeper now, the laughter of a father who had seen God's faithfulness with his own eyes. The boy was the living promise, the flesh of the covenant, the proof that heaven does not forget. Yet even as Abraham rested in the joy of his fulfilled hope, the God who had called him from Ur, who had sealed his covenant in blood, and who had opened Sarah's womb, prepared to test the depth of his faith once more. One night, as the stars burned bright above the hills of Moriah, the voice of the Lord came to Abraham, clear as thunder yet tender as a whisper. "Abraham." And he answered, "Here I am." Then the Lord said, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell you." The words struck him like lightning. His breath caught in his chest, his heart seemed to stop. Isaac, the child of promise, the laughter of his old age, the one through whom all nations were to be blessed. He sat in silence as the desert wind blew cold around him. But the voice of God was unmistakable. Abraham lifted his face toward heaven, tears filling his eyes, and whispered, "Your will be done." Before dawn he rose, his steps heavy, his heart trembling but obedient. He split wood for the offering and saddled his donkey. Isaac walked beside him, unaware, carrying only curiosity and trust in his eyes. 2 young servants followed them as they set out toward the place God had shown. For 3 days they journeyed through the wilderness, the sun burning by day, the stars watching silently by night. Each step pressed deeper into the soil of obedience, each breath a prayer that God might yet provide another way. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the mountain in the distance, Moriah, standing solemn and still like a witness before the heavens. He turned to his servants and said, "Stay here with the donkey, the lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come again to you." His voice did not break, though his heart did. He placed the wood upon Isaac's shoulders, took the fire and the knife in his own hands, and together they climbed the hill. The boy walked quietly for a time, then turned to his father. "My father," he said softly. "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham stopped, his throat tight with grief, and answered, "My son, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering." Isaac nodded and walked on, his faith as simple and pure as the morning light. When they reached the top of the mountain, Abraham built an altar of stone. Each rock he placed seemed to weigh the world upon his back. He arranged the wood in order, his hands trembling. Then he turned to Isaac. The boy looked at him without fear, only trust, the kind of trust that cannot be taught, only given. Abraham's lips quivered as he spoke, "My son," but no more words came. He bound Isaac with the cords, the same way he had bound countless offerings before, and laid him upon the altar atop the wood. His eyes closed as he raised the knife. Time itself seemed to stop. The wind ceased, the birds grew silent, the air was thick with eternity. Then, just as the blade was about to fall, a voice called out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." He froze, the knife trembling in his hand. "Here I am," he cried. The voice said, "Do not lay your hand upon the lad, nor do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham fell to his knees, the knife slipping from his grasp. Tears flooded his eyes as he looked up, and there, caught by its horns in a thicket, was a ram. He rose, untied his son, and together they offered the ram in Isaac's place. Smoke rose from the altar, curling into the sky, and Abraham named the place Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will provide. As the fire crackled, Isaac stood beside his father, silent and awestruck. The fear and love of God had burned into his soul forever. He understood now that faith was not merely believing in God's goodness but surrendering even the dearest thing to him. The voice of the angel of the Lord came again from heaven, saying, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gates of their enemies. In your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Abraham bowed his face to the ground, overcome by awe. The promise was now more than words, it was life sealed in obedience. God had not demanded Isaac's death, he had desired Abraham's heart. Through this act, heaven revealed the depth of divine mercy, that one day another father would give his only son, not as a test, but as a sacrifice for all. As father and son descended the mountain, the light of dawn broke upon them. The sky above Moriah glowed with golden fire, the same fire that had once sealed the covenant, now shining as a promise of redemption yet to come. Isaac walked close to his father, his hand resting upon Abraham's arm. No words were spoken, none were needed. They both knew they had stood upon the edge of eternity and returned with faith refined like gold. When they came again to the servants, Abraham said simply, "The Lord has provided," and they journeyed back to Beersheba, where the tents of peace awaited them. Sarah greeted them with tears and joy, her eyes searching their faces and finding in them a peace beyond understanding. That night, as the camp fell silent, Abraham stood outside his tent and gazed once more at the stars. They seemed brighter than ever, burning with the same promise that had begun his journey. "You are faithful," he whispered. "You ask for all, but you give back more than man could ever dream." Evening passed, and morning came, the day when faith was tested by fire, and love proved stronger than fear, upon the mountain where God himself provided. The death of Sarah, a promise endures. The years moved softly across the land of Canaan, like the wind over wheat fields. The tents of Abraham stood among the oaks of Mamre, peaceful beneath the wide, eternal sky. Time had blessed them and taken from them in equal measure. Isaac had grown into a man, tall, strong, and quiet, his face carrying the gentleness of his mother and the faith of his father. The laughter that had once echoed through the camp had mellowed into calm contentment. Yet in the heart of Abraham's household, age began to whisper its final words. Sarah, the mother of nations, whose barren womb had once been made fruitful by divine promise, now felt her strength fading like the light at dusk. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in crimson and gold, Sarah sat at the entrance of her tent, her hands resting on her lap. The wind brushed her gray hair, and her eyes gazed toward the horizon where the stars would soon appear. Abraham came to her side and knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. For a long moment, they said nothing. Words were not needed, the years had spoken enough. Their eyes told the story of every trial and every joy, from the day God called them out of Ur to the birth of their promised son. "Do you remember," Sarah said softly, her voice a fragile echo of youth, "when he told us I would bear a child, and I laughed?" Abraham smiled faintly. "I remember," he said, his voice trembling. "And he made you laugh indeed." A quiet peace settled between them, the peace of a promise fulfilled. That night, Sarah closed her eyes and drifted into the sleep that does not end. The stars above shone with their cold, eternal beauty, and the camp was still. When dawn came, Abraham sat beside her body in silence, the morning light falling upon her face as if heaven itself kissed her farewell. He did not cry out, for his grief ran deeper than tears. His heart ached with both sorrow and gratitude, sorrow for what had passed, and gratitude for what God had given. She had been more than his wife, she had been his companion in faith, the mother of promise, the laughter of his old age. Abraham rose and tore his garments, the ancient sign of mourning, and bowed his head. The servants gathered outside the tent, their faces solemn. Isaac stood apart, his eyes hollow with loss. He had loved his mother dearly, for she had filled his youth with warmth and gentleness. Abraham placed his hand upon his son's shoulder. "We must honor her," he said quietly. "Not with tears alone, but with faith, as she lived." He went out from the camp to speak with the sons of hate, the people of the land. They greeted him with respect, for Abraham was known among them as a prince of God, wise and just. Standing before them, he said, "I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a possession of a burial place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight." The sons of hate answered him kindly, saying, "Hear us, my lord. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our sepulchres. None of us will withhold his tomb from you." But Abraham bowed low before them and said, "If you are willing that I should bury my dead, hear me and entreat Ephron the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which is at the end of his field. For the full price let him give it to me for a possession among you." Ephron was sitting among the men at the gate, and he answered Abraham, saying, "No, my lord, hear me. The field I give to you, and the cave that is in it, I give it in the presence of my people, bury your dead." But Abraham insisted, "If you will give it, I pray you, hear me. I will pay the price for the field. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead there." Then Ephron said, "My lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that between me and you?" Abraham bowed, weighed out the silver before the people, and purchased the field and the cave at Machpelah. Thus the land became his, the first piece of the promised inheritance, not taken by conquest but received through faith and humility. That evening, Abraham and Isaac carried Sarah's body to the cave. The air was cool and still, the scent of myrrh and spices filling the air. The servants followed at a distance, their torches flickering in the twilight. Abraham laid her upon a stone bench inside the cave, his trembling hands arranging her shroud with reverence. For a long while he knelt beside her, his head bowed. "You are the laughter God gave me," he whispered. "You believed when faith seemed foolish. You are gone from my sight, but not from the promise." Isaac stood beside his father, silent tears falling down his face. He took his mother's hand one last time, kissed it gently, and turned away. When they left the cave, Abraham turned to look back. The entrance was dark now, framed by stone and shadow, but the peace that lingered there was not of this world. The wind moved softly through the trees, and somewhere a dove cooed. The world was quieter without her laughter, but the promise remained. Abraham knew that the same God who had given him life in his old age would one day give it again beyond death. The field of Machpelah, with its cave, became a symbol, not only of loss, but of faith in what lies beyond the grave. That night, under the same stars that had witnessed his journey from the beginning, Abraham stood alone and lifted his hands toward heaven. "You are faithful," he said. "You have taken her, yet you have left me your promise. I am but dust and breath, but your word endures forever." And in the stillness of the desert, his heart found peace once more. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when love yielded to loss, and yet faith shone brighter than sorrow, for the promise of God does not die with those who believe. The bride for Isaac, a covenant of love. The years after Sarah's passing were quiet in the camp of Abraham. The old patriarch's beard had turned white as the sands of the desert, and his eyes carried the weight of a lifetime walked hand in hand with God. Yet even as his body weakened, his spirit remained steadfast. Isaac dwelled with him, tending the flocks and keeping the faith, but a shadow lingered in Abraham's heart. His son was still alone. The promise of countless descendants could not unfold without a wife for Isaac, one chosen not by the desires of man but by the will of heaven. And so, one evening, as the sun bled gold across the hills of Canaan, Abraham called his most trusted servant, Eliezer of Damascus, to his tent. The servant bowed low before him, and Abraham spoke, his voice aged but resolute. "Swear to me by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but that you shall go to my country and to my kindred, and take a wife for Isaac from there." Eliezer lifted his eyes, uncertain. "Perhaps the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to your country?" Abraham shook his head slowly. "See to it that you do not bring my son there. The Lord God of heaven took me from my father's house and from my kindred, and swore to me, saying, 'To your seed will I give this land.' He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there." The old servant placed his hand beneath Abraham's thigh, swearing the oath before God. The next morning, Eliezer rose early, loaded 10 camels with gifts, gold, silver, fine garments, and provisions, and set out toward the land of Nahor, in Mesopotamia. For many days he traveled beneath the burning sun and the cold stars, through dry plains and across rivers, until he reached the city of Nahor as the evening drew near. Outside the city, there was a well where the women came to draw water at the cool of the day. Eliezer stopped his camels, knelt beside them, and prayed. "O Lord God of my master Abraham," he whispered, "please grant me success this day and show kindness to my master. Behold, I stand by this well, and the daughters of the men of the city come out to draw water. Let it be that the young woman to whom I say, 'Please let down your pitcher that I may drink,' and who answers, 'Drink, and I will give your camels water also,' let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown kindness to my master." Even before he finished speaking, a young woman came from the city, her pitcher upon her shoulder. The light of the setting sun caught her face, and it seemed to glow with grace and purity. Her steps were gentle, her eyes bright with kindness. She went down to the well, filled her pitcher, and came up. Eliezer ran to meet her and said, "Please, let me drink a little water from your pitcher." She said, "Drink, my lord." And when he had drunk, she added, "I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking." Quickly she poured water into the trough and ran again to the well, drawing more for all his camels. The servant watched her in silence, astonished, as the very prayer he had spoken was fulfilled before his eyes. When the camels had finished drinking, Eliezer took a golden ring and 2 bracelets of gold and placed them upon her hands. "Whose daughter are you?" he asked. "Tell me, please, is there room in your father's house for us to lodge?" She smiled and said, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." At those words, Eliezer bowed his head and worshipped the Lord, saying, "Blessed be the Lord God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his mercy and his truth toward my master. The Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's brethren. The young woman, Rebekah, ran ahead to her mother's house and told them all that had happened. When her brother Laban heard of the man by the well and saw the jewelry upon her hands, he ran out to meet him and brought him to their home. There the servant was given food and water, but before he would eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my errand." And they said, "Speak on." So Eliezer told them everything, from the command of Abraham to the prayer at the well and how God had answered it. When he finished, Bethuel and Laban said, "The thing comes from the Lord, we cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you, take her and go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has spoken." The next morning, when Eliezer rose to leave, they said, "Let the young woman stay with us a few days, at least 10, after that she shall go." But the servant answered, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way, send me away that I may go to my master." They called Rebekah and said, "Will you go with this man?" And she said simply, "I will go." So they blessed her and said, "Our sister, may you be the mother of thousands of 10,000s, and may your seed possess the gate of those who hate them." Then Rebekah arose with her maidens, mounted the camels, and followed the servant. The journey back was long, but Rebekah's heart was calm. She thought of the God who had guided her steps, of the man she had not yet seen but to whom she had been called by destiny. As they approached the southern fields of Canaan, the sun was setting, and the sky burned like bronze. Isaac was walking alone in the field, meditating as he often did at the close of day. He lifted his eyes and saw the camels coming. Rebekah also lifted her eyes, and when she saw him, she asked the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" Eliezer answered, "It is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all that he had done, and Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent. There he took her as his wife, and he loved her, and she comforted him after his mother's death. The promise of God moved forward through them, not by power or chance, but by faith and providence, a covenant of love born beneath the watchful eyes of heaven. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when two hearts met by divine design, and the promise of Abraham found its home in love. The birth of Esau and Jacob, two nations within. The years passed in peace for Isaac and Rebekah. The tents of Abraham's sons stood among the wells of Beersheba, where the fields stretched wide and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and sheep. Isaac was a man of quiet strength, gentle in spirit, walking in the faith of his father. Rebekah, radiant and wise, was his companion in all things. Their marriage had been blessed with love, yet one sorrow remained. The years passed, and Rebekah bore no child. The promise that had flowed through Abraham's line seemed to rest still, waiting. Isaac prayed. Day after day he lifted his heart to heaven, kneeling in the silence of the fields, the same fields where he had once walked alone and met his bride. "O Lord, God of my father Abraham," he would say, "you opened the womb of Sarah when she was old, open now the womb of Rebekah, that your covenant may live." And the Lord heard his prayer. In time, Rebekah conceived, but her joy soon turned to confusion and pain. The life within her was restless, turbulent, like two storms colliding beneath her heart. Day and night she felt the struggle, and her spirit grew heavy. One evening, in anguish, she cried to the heavens, "If this is so, why do I live?" Then the voice of the Lord came to her, calm and clear as the breath of wind after rain. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Rebekah trembled, not in fear but in awe, for she understood that what grew within her was more than the beginning of life, it was the unfolding of destiny. The months passed, and when the time came, she gave birth to twins. The first came out red and covered with hair, strong and wild, and they called his name Esau. After him came his brother, his hand gripping Esau's heel as though refusing to be left behind, and they called his name Jacob. From their first breath, the prophecy began to unfold. Esau grew into a man of the fields, rugged, impulsive, and skilled with the bow. He loved the hunt and the thrill of open spaces, his spirit as untamed as the land itself. Jacob was quieter, a dweller of tents, thoughtful and cunning, his mind always turning toward the unseen. Isaac loved Esau, for the taste of wild game pleased him, but Rebekah loved Jacob, for she saw in him the shadow of God's promise. Years passed, and the difference between the brothers deepened like the split of a river. Esau roamed the hills with laughter and confidence, his hands rough with labor and his heart quick to anger but quick to forgive. Jacob moved more softly, speaking little, his eyes sharp and watchful. He learned to listen, to men, to silence, to destiny itself. One day, Esau came in from the fields, weary and faint with hunger. The sun burned red upon the horizon, and the air was thick with dust. Jacob sat by the tent, tending a pot of lentil stew, its aroma rich and warm. Esau staggered toward him and said, "Feed me, I pray you, with that red stew, for I am faint." Jacob looked up, his eyes thoughtful. "Sell me your birthright first," he said. Esau laughed bitterly. "Behold, I am about to die, what profit shall this birthright be to me?" "Swear to me," said Jacob. And Esau swore, selling his birthright for a meal of bread and lentils. Jacob gave it to him, and Esau ate and drank, then rose and went his way, despising what was sacred. The covenant line that had begun with Abraham quietly shifted in that moment, not by strength but by choice. Time moved on, and the tents of Isaac prospered. The wells he dug yielded water in abundance, and his flocks multiplied, for the Lord was with him. Yet the hearts of his sons moved in different paths. Esau took wives from among the Canaanites, women who brought sorrow to Isaac and Rebekah, for they did not honor the God of the covenant. Jacob stayed near his mother, learning from her the ways of the promise, the patience of faith, the cunning of survival, the wisdom of trust. Rebekah never forgot the words God had spoken to her, "The elder shall serve the younger." She carried them like fire in her heart, waiting for the time when they would be fulfilled. As the years went on, Isaac grew old and his eyes dimmed. The once strong shepherd now leaned on his staff and listened more than he saw. But even as his strength faded, the covenant of God burned steady within him. He often called his sons to his side, speaking to them of Abraham and the promise of nations. Esau would listen, nodding, his thoughts far away in the hills. Jacob would sit quietly at his feet, drinking in every word. Rebekah watched them both, knowing that the struggle within her womb had not ended at birth, it continued still, between flesh and spirit, between impulse and destiny. The world around them seemed at peace, but heaven's story was still unfolding. Jacob's cunning would one day meet Esau's strength, mercy would meet justice, and through the line of Jacob the light of the covenant would shine forth. But for now, They remained two brothers, two nations growing under one roof, their paths intertwined by blood and divided by purpose. At night, when the camp slept, Rebekah would sit by the entrance of her tent and look at the stars, the same stars Abraham once counted, the same promise still alive in her family. She would whisper, "Your word endures, O Lord. You chose the unlikely, the quiet, the patient. Let your will be done." And the wind would move softly through the palms, carrying her prayer into eternity. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when two brothers were born, and through them, the story of God's covenant took its next breath, setting the course of nations yet to come. The blessing and the deception, Jacob's rise. The days of Isaac grew heavy with age, and his eyes, once clear as the morning sky, had turned clouded and dim. The years of peace and labor had softened him, and he dwelt quietly in his tent, surrounded by the murmur of servants and the scent of the fields he loved. He knew his time was drawing near, and he longed to pass the blessing of Abraham to his son. Esau, the firstborn, stood tall before him, his hands rough from the hunt, his face weathered by the sun. Isaac loved him deeply, for he was strong, bold, and a man of the wild, the reflection of youth Isaac himself had long left behind. "My son," he said, his voice trembling like the wind in the oaks. "Behold, I am old, I do not know the day of my death. Take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out into the field and hunt game for me. Prepare for me the savory food that I love, that my soul may bless you before I die." Esau bowed and departed swiftly, his spirit eager and unaware of the shadow that would soon fall upon their tent. Rebekah stood nearby, hidden behind the woven curtain, her heart stirred with the old fire of prophecy. She remembered the voice of God that had spoken to her before the twins were born, "The elder shall serve the younger." The time had come for that word to live. She called Jacob in secret, her eyes bright with determination. "Listen to me, my son," she whispered. "I heard your father speak to Esau. He has sent him to the field to bring back game so that he may bless him before he dies. Now therefore, obey my voice. Go to the flock, bring me 2 choice young goats, and I will prepare them as your father loves. You shall take them to him that he may eat and bless you before his death." Jacob hesitated, his brow furrowed with doubt. "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am smooth. My father may feel me, and I shall seem to him a deceiver. I shall bring a curse upon myself, not a blessing." But Rebekah's voice was steady. "Upon me be your curse, my son. Only obey my voice, and go." So Jacob went, his heart pounding, and brought the goats to his mother. She prepared them with care, the way Isaac loved, seasoning them with herbs and roasting them until the air filled with their scent. Then she took Esau's best garments, rich with the smell of the fields, and placed them upon Jacob. She covered his hands and the smooth of his neck with the skins of the goats, that he might feel rough and wild like his brother. Jacob entered his father's tent, the tray trembling in his hands. "My father," he said softly. Isaac stirred and replied, "Here I am." "Who are you, my son?" Jacob swallowed hard. "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." Isaac frowned, uncertain. "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" Jacob answered, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." The old man's hands moved slowly, reaching toward the sound of the voice. "Come near," that I may feel you, my son, whether you are truly Esau or not." Jacob stepped forward, the skins on his hands warm beneath his father's touch. Isaac felt the roughness and nodded. The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He drew him closer and smelled the garments. The scent of the field, the wild earth and the wind, filled his lungs, and his doubts faded. "See," he said softly, "the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed." Isaac ate the food and drank the wine, and his spirit was moved. Then he laid his trembling hands upon Jacob's head and blessed him. "God give you of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow before you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Jacob bowed low, tears burning in his eyes, for even in deceit he felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. He rose and left the tent quickly, his heart racing like a hunted deer. Hardly had he gone when Esau entered, his arms laden with fresh game, his voice filled with triumph. "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me." Isaac stiffened. "Who are you?" Esau laughed. "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Isaac trembled violently. "Who? Where is he who brought me game and I ate of it before you came?" I blessed him, and indeed, he shall be blessed. The truth struck them both like thunder. Esau cried out with a great and bitter cry, "Bless me also, O my father." But Isaac could only weep, for the blessing once spoken could not be recalled. "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing." Esau's cry turned to anger. "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times, he took my birthright, and now he has taken my blessing." Isaac, heartbroken, laid a trembling hand upon Esau's shoulder and said, "Behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Esau turned away, his face hard with fury. He vowed in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." Rebekah heard and called Jacob once more, her voice low but urgent. "Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him until your brother's fury turns away, for Esau comforts himself with the thought of killing you." She kissed her son with trembling lips, her heart torn between pride and sorrow. Before dawn, Jacob left the tents of his father, the wind cold upon his face, the stars bright above him. He walked alone through the wilderness, carrying nothing but a staff and the weight of both blessing and guilt. Yet in that exile, God's plan moved quietly, unseen. The covenant of Abraham had passed once more, not by human merit, but by divine will that uses even frailty for its purpose. Evening passed, and morning came, the day when deceit carried the promise forward, and grace began to shape a man who would wrestle with God and be renamed Israel.